I've probably said this before when it refers to another maybe book of the Bible, but Esther is probably my favorite book of the entire Bible. I love teaching Esther. You might have noticed a pattern. Like I really do love those Chamesh Megillot, the 5 scrolls of Judaism. That we've been studying. So we studied Lamentations. Last week we did Ruth. We did Song of Songs. So it's like these books that are just so multi-layered, and they're really beautifully composed works. And Esther, with maybe some exception, but I would say Esther is probably the most, if not one of the most, multi-layered books we have in the Bible. It can be read in so many different ways. It is, as we used to say in Texas, a hoot and a half. It is just a fun, enjoyable, silly read that the more you read it, the more layers you find. There's so much great stuff there. The author or authors had a really good time writing this book, and I think that makes a difference when the authors, you can just tell, are enjoying themselves. So, and the rabbis certainly enjoy themselves when trying to understand and interpret this text, because it does get a bit ridiculous. So, what is Esther? What's the book of Esther? And so there are different ways of defining what this book is. So one is, it's of course the Peshat, the most simple way of looking at it. It's a story, right, about the bravery of Esther and her uncle, stepfather relation, Mordechai, right, and how they saved their Jewish people from a genocidal plot. Okay, sounds good. It promotes Jewish identity, solidarity, a strong connection with the Jewish biblical tradition. And it also addresses, which we're going to touch upon again in a moment, it addresses the problems of being a minority community, because it means that you're at the whim of the majority community. And so that is one way to read Esther. Now, not to be the Grinch who stole Purim, as I often have been accused of other holidays as well. When we read this book as a literal historical work, we're probably doing it a disservice, because most likely 100% it is not true. This is not a real life story. It has never happened. There's no historical basis for this book at all. And the author, did not intend for it to be taken literally as an act of historical fact. The reason why we know that is because we can read the book and find the many multitude of historical inaccuracies in the text. And so, sure, you have a little bit here and there. Kingdom of Persia was pretty large, as it's described. We have some idea of Persian tradition, Persian custom, which is certainly in the book. As we've seen in the very beginning, there is a concern for proper protocol and legalities, so that does mesh sort of with the Persian narrative. Some exaggeration, but fine, that's okay. Problem number one, we can't find a King Achashverosh ever in any kind of Persian history. It never comes up. And perhaps more pointedly, a Jewish Queen Esther is never sourced anywhere in any other text except for the Bible, the book of Esther. And so we can guess maybe that Achashverosh could have been modeled on somebody, right? It's usually modeled after Xerxes or Artaxerxes, but there's no Achashverosh anywhere, nor in Esther. How is the Queen of Persia decided in the book of Esther? A beauty contest. Bring all the beautiful women, as we're going to get to later on today. Surprising that's not how queens were picked in the world. They didn't have like America's Next Top Model be the choice for queen. That was not how that worked. There was, nobility, princely families, etc., etc. One wonderful note, and actually I talked about this with my teens in the confirmation class, the senior class this past week, is that in the story, of course, the crux of the story is that a Persian, leader not the king, but his right hand man was trying to kill all the Jews, in Persia. When from a historical standpoint, actually Persia was very tolerant. Persia was sort of known for the fact that they were very kind and very helpful to minority communities, especially the Jewish community, because they sort of fell under that same paradigm as others did, which was pay your taxes. Other than that, do what you want to do. Like they don't really care what you believe, what you do. Just pay your tribute and go on your merry way. They have other things to do. So Persia didn't really have any interest during its time at the top of the pecking order, the food chain, so to speak, to oppress different peoples. They conquered you, then they said, you know what, you're conquered, give us some money, do whatever you want, afterwards. Just pay us our tribute. So we can certainly sort of look at this book and say perhaps it is written as historical fiction.
And God was never mentioned in it.
And yeah, we're going to get there, certainly. God is never mentioned in this book, which brings us actually very nicely to our next point, that this book can be read as a satire. It can be read almost as a slapstick. It's often referred to as a burlesque. It is just naughty enough, right? To have that sort of feeling to it. It's, very sexualized. There's a lot of imagery there, but meant to be comedic, sort of comedic imagery. And so, as we're going to see today, the Vashti story is made even sillier, sort of by the rabbis. They sort of create a whole different, in their imagination, a way to make it even sillier than it actually reads in the original text. And Achashverosh, we have archetype characters, right, in the story. So you have Esther, the brave, courageous sort of heroine who struggles with identity, but that's her role. You have the buffoonish king. You have the megalomaniacal, villain. You have the wise sage. So you have these categories of character that the author uses to create the story. And so there's a lot of exaggeration, a lot of things taken to the extreme, a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of just like things that are interpreted the wrong way, use of caricature. In the Hebrew itself, you might have heard me mention this before, the Hebrew itself has a verb. Hafach is the root. Hey, pei, chet, chaf, sorry. Hey, pei, chaf, hafach. Hafach means to flip, to turn over, right? And so the idea in this story is reversal, right? So people who wind up being mistreated wind up being the winners at the end. Things that you wouldn't expect to happen, it keeps on turning over on itself. And so if you go to Israel, you want a cappuccino, you order a cafe hafuch, you order a flipped coffee, right? So that's part of the idea here, is that there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of subverted expectations in the book of Esther. If you wanted to take this text even more seriously, so putting us on the satire part of it, and as I alluded to a little earlier, is that this can be seen written as a text that comedically makes a point. The point being, the land of Israel is good. It's important to be in the land of Israel. When you're outside of Israel, bad stuff's going to happen to you. If you're in the diaspora, if you are not in the Jewish homeland, you're asking for trouble, because you could be in a diaspora where you're a minority community and things could be going great. You could be living high on the hog, maybe the kosher hog. You can be living high on the hog and it's fine until, right? There's always an until you get a doofus king that's going to now be ruling the kingdom, and a psychotic henchman that are going to kill you like this for absolutely no reason at all. You don't have that problem, God willing, when you're in the land of Israel. You don't have that same scenario that can play out. And so this text itself could have been written for that very reason, as what we call a polemic, right? A polemical text that basically wants to underscore for all of us the danger of living outside of Israel as a minority population. And it can be noted You know, if one wants to make other historical connections, one can, but it can be noted that in the story of Purim, the Jewish community is threatened with extermination, and that one member of the Persian populace stands up and says, no, this is a bad idea. That's not recorded in the book of Esther, right? The summons, the statement is sent throughout the entire Persian Empire, and the story never says anyone had a problem with it, right? And so that the population, you know, we see Haman as the villain, but the population can be viewed as co-conspirators, right? You know, because they did not stand up to help the Jewish population. The last point I'm going to make about the way we can read this text, it's one of my favorite ways of reading this text, is an etiology. An etiology meaning that it is a text that is meant to explain a practice that was already occurring. So this is to say that there is a possibility that during the Jewish year, there was a day people got a little drunk. They got into costumes. They had a good time. They were feasting, and the people forgot the reason why they were doing it. They were just having a grand old time, a good day. And the rabbis don't like that so much. You know, oh, we're having too much fun for no reason. We need a reason. We need a reason for all this celebration and frivolity. So let's create a story that explains a practice that we're already doing. And so as you read the text itself, you're going to see some allusions to that in the text. That's going to say, and this is why the Jews do this, you know, because it's trying to give us an explanation for why we do what we already do. Perhaps, just an idea. So in terms of authorship, there's no attribution, like Talmudically. There's no, you know, we don't say King David wrote this, you know, Solomon wrote this, you know, Jeremiah wrote this. We don't have any of that. There's a commentary that says Mordechai, you know, wrote the story himself. Others say the men of the Great Assembly wrote it. The men of the Great Assembly didn't really exist, so it's just more mishigas. But someone had to have written this text at some point. It's usually placed 400 BCE to as late as 100 BCE. So it can be seen as a very late book. It is of note that is the only text of the 39 books of the Bible that there is not one scrap, one shred, one piece of scroll that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Wasn't there. They found every other book, you know, had a fragment, every other book had a piece of it. They did not have Esther, which means either the book was written super late and they didn't have it, or one can make an assumption, as I would make, that the dudes at Qumran, and dudes is frankly a good term for this because it was an all-male society, they might not have really enjoyed a book about a female heroine so much. It might not have tickled their fancy. So they might not have, you know, hey, who needs this, you know, and that might not be why it was found. The guys in Qumran were not a lot of fun. These are just some boring people who were a little bit nutso as it was. And so I just think the book of Esther might not have spoken to them in that way. Esther and Mordechai are two heroes. Where do their names come from? Most likely Persian names. So if we have a later date on the book, that would make sense because the Persian, you know, empire, at least for our purposes, sort of crests at 536 BCE and lasts a little while, it's about 332. And so it would be common to have heroes named perhaps in a Persian manner. Esther is very close to Ishtar, which was the Persian goddess of fertility, amongst other things. And Mordecai, pretty close to Marduk, which is another one of their deities. So Esther and Mordecai were pretty common names in Persian society. Another sign of assimilation, right? And so again, we are assuming these are assimilated Jews, as we'll see in a little bit more in the story. There is a dispute post facto in the Talmud and rabbinic literature about whether or not Esther should even be included in the Bible, right? That happens a few times, but again, these arguments the decision was already made. It's already there. They're just trying to, justify why it's there, and that it was a passed down orally. This book before it was written down. There's no mention of God. It is silly. It takes place outside of Israel. There are a lot of reasons for it not to be included, but nonetheless, there it is. It is in fact included, and it is seen as an important book. So it is still there. How Jewish is Esther? In terms of just her Judaism, we mentioned God doesn't appear. There are some, Jewishy things that are involved in the book. So Mordechai, right? So let's take Mordechai for a second. Mordechai, he hears about the plot against the Jews. What does he do? He dons sackcloth and ashes, a Jewish mourning, tradition. And he cries out. He cries out, but he doesn't cry out to the eternal, right? He doesn't cry out to God. He just cries out. There's, not much mention about the community praying, for salvation. No one's calling out to God. Esther tells the Jews to fast, but not to pray. And there's no real thanks or praise of God when it's over, right? Esther, as a Jew and as a queen, she's marrying a non-Jewish person, right? Achashverosh. That's pretty clear, right? So we have an intermarriage. Esther doesn't pray, doesn't keep kosher by any sense. We don't get any sense that she's like, give me my vegan, kashrut meal. That's not what Esther's doing here. There's no sense about her modesty. There's no real sense about really anything that 2,000 years ago, I'm going to make that clear, that 2,000 years ago would be seen as Jewish things to do. Now, of course, we look at it and go, hey, what's the problem? He sounds like a Reformed Jew for a lot of different things. But 2,000 years ago, the expectation was perhaps a little different what a Jewish character, a Jewish identified person would do, right? And you could say, well, maybe they didn't think about this. But we have other books, especially the book of Daniel, where the protagonist, it's very clear, interacts with his Judaism differently than Esther does. And they're both, obviously late books. Other than that, I'm going to dive right in to the text. I feel like we've had a good introduction. Any question on the text? Cool. Now we can get to the fun part and get into Esther. Okay, chapter 1. I'm just going to go down my list here. So the order in which you signed on pretty much is how it's going to go, unless somehow your text box moved. So, Sharon.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Would Orthodox communities read this for Purim?
They would read it as more literal, yes, in some Orthodox communities. I wouldn't say in all Orthodox communities. It would depend on which synagogue you were at. But they certainly, like if you were in like an ultra-Orthodox place, they would certainly take it literally. In a more modern Orthodox place, I think they would play with it a little bit more and be more open to other interpretations.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Sharon, take it away.
Okay. It happened in the days of Ahasuerus that Ahasuerus, this is always a hard name to say, who
Yes.
reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the administration of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces in his service. For no fewer than 180 days, he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty.
There you go. We got there. One more word. I try. It's hard. I appreciate you guys bearing with me. Okay, so good start. We're going to get a placement of the story. We have a sense of of some of the background. First chapter is going to be background anyway. 127 provinces. That's a lot of provinces. 127 is a special number. for absolutely only one reason I can think of in the Bible. And the rabbis bring it out as to why 127 provinces are important. We think back to the past. We think back to Genesis. All the way back, we travel back in time. And we have a matriarch. In fact, the first matriarch of the Hebrew Bible, which is Sarah. Yes, Sarah indeed is the first matriarch. And Sarah dies at the age of 127 years
Right.
old. And so the rabbis connect this and say, Esther is, destined to rule over as many kingdoms, as many provinces as Sarah lived in her years. And so that's the connection there of 127 provinces. It's a nice idea. Why not? One thing I did not mention, because we're going to focus on it a little bit more next week, time permitting, is Esther and Intertextuality, meaning that the book of Esther draws upon other books of the Bible. Esther and Joseph, for example, have a lot in common. And Esther and Jonah, surprisingly, also have a little bit in common as well. And so we'll touch on that a little bit more next week. But the rabbis find some ways of interspersing other biblical narratives, of course, into this one. Okay. I'm going to keep diving in. Now it's time to get a little bit of the good stuff. A little bit of the booze is going to be flowing. So, Debbie Siegel, Debbie, you want to pick up over here? You got to unmute. There you go.
Okay. I just unmuted. Okay, now I can.
You got it.
At the end of this period, the king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress Shushan, high and low alike. There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool caught up by the cords of fine linen and purple wool to silver rods and alabaster columns. And there were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. Royal wine was served in abundance as befits a king, in golden beakers, beakers of varied design. And the rule for the drinking was no restrictions, for the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes. In addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus.
Okay, good. We're going to stop right there. I'm trying to remember. I'm having a brain freeze moment here. Plus, it wasn't my generation anyway. Sorry to say. The Robin Leach show, where he's like went to the famous people's homes, the lives of the rich and famous, or whatever it is. It's like, I'm sure there's a modern version of that I can't think of what it is. But like, MTV Cribs or whatever. I'm sure again, it's a modern iteration. They got a lot of money, got a lot of green, right? You're seeing how the other half lives. So you're getting this peek into palace life. The gardens are beautiful. There's all this beautiful white cotton and blue wool and linen and silver and gold and silver and alabaster and marble, mother of pearl. Oh my goodness. The money is just flowing. It's a great time. And we're getting all boozed up, right? And so the royal wine is flowing. Anytime you finish your glass, another wine, glass will be poured right for you of the good stuff, not the Trader Joe's stuff, but they would give you the good stuff. These are expensive bottles of wine being poured out here. In golden beakers, right? I mean, it's just a good time is being had by all. A huge party at Achashverosh's place. No restrictions. Drink as much as you want. No one's driving home. This party is going to go on for a long time. Everyone's having a grand old time, which, of course, by the way, as we can already guess, I'm sure, links some of the drinking of Purim, for us. Right, that it's a celebration, and sometimes alcohol is a part of our festivity, for better or for worse. But the idea being that there's a lot of boozing going on in this story. So while the men are boozing it up in their end of the palace, Queen Vashti also having a shindig as well with the women in the royal palace. Everyone's having a grand old time. Okay, Renee. Lucky you get some of these names. Go ahead.
Okay. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Mahuman, Bazitha, oh thanks, Harbona, Bigtha, Habgatha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs in attendance on King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing a royal diadem, to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command. Conveyed by the eunuchs, the king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him.
Burning fury. It is top 5 for me, one of my favorite euphemisms in the Bible, that the king was merry with wine. Hatov et lev, King Achashverosh, that his heart was gladdened with wine. Another way of saying he was snickered. So he was a little bit drunk. So going back to what I had mentioned before about satire and about whatever it is, these 7 names are ridiculous. And after I try to get through them, you did a very nice job with that, Renee. But I guess they're supposed to, sound funny in a way. There's Bigtha and Harbona and Abatha and Zathar and Carcass. Sure, why not? I think just having some fun with us with the names. And these eunuchs are there to attend to the king. And so now the fun begins. Well, the fun always is there, but the fun continues. Okay, what's the order for King Ahasuerus to Vashti? Come on out to the party, right? Wearing your royal diadem, display your beauty amongst the people, right? Amongst all these officials. Okay, what does that sound like to you? Like what's the gist here? What's Ahasuerus want to do?
He wants to show her off, and he wants to probably something bad.
Wants to show her off, right? He wants to brag a little bit. So how do we imagine Vashti coming out to the people here?
Naked.
Why? It's exactly right. But why do we imagine that?
I don't know.
Why else would she be mad?
One could think it's not appropriate anyway,
Right.
even if she was fully dressed to come out, because
Right.
they have a separate party, they have a separate thing going on. It's probably not procedural, hey, I'm not going to go display myself for your drunken, oafish friends. Thanks, honey. He's not husband of the year here. But the text says she's wearing her royal diadem, right? She is wearing her crown, with the implication being, bingo. So exactly. So that's where the rabbis take it, right? Is that she's wearing the crown and nothing else.
Nothing else.
One can say that the intent of the author was that she's coming out in all of her royal finery, right? She's dressed to the nines. She is bejeweled, and she is just like in her best dress, her Shabbos best, her best dress, the whole thing. And she's coming out. Look at me, I'm so beautiful in all of her gear, her royal gear. The rabbis look at it and say, royal diadem means only her royal diadem, only her crown, right? And that's why she gets so appropriately ticked off, right? Is that she's being asked to basically dance naked in front of her husband's drunken friends. And so as the queen, one might think that if the first idea was not okay, of her coming dressed out in all of her finery, how much the more so, right? If she is coming out in her birthday suit. So the rabbis have a little fun with this. So we're taking a little pause from the story to read a midrash here. So this is an interpretation of Esther. And so the rabbis take that story, take that idea, and they have a little fun with it. Bob, you there, Bob? Bob.
Okay, to bring Vashti the queen before the king wearing the royal crown. Rabbi Abu said, what makes atonement for Israel is that when the Israelites eat and drink and make merry, they bless and praise and extol the Holy One. Blessed be he. Whereas the other nations eat and drink and they turn to lewdness. So here, one said, the Median women are more beautiful, and the other said, the Persian women are more beautiful. Said that fool to them, the vessel which I use is neither Median nor Persian, but Chaldean. Would you like to see it? They replied, yes, but she must be naked. Very well, he said to them, let her be naked.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So husband of the year alert right here. So we have two pieces here, right? So the first piece is one that is supposed to extol the virtues of Israel. Because you know what? Every once in a while, we as Jews have a little wine, have a little good food. We're not averse to a party, right? That's fine. But when we do it, it's to praise God's name. It's in service of the Holy One. Blessed be God when we do it. When they do it, the others, when they do it, it's just their minds turn to lewdness and lasciviousness and all bad things. So here's the example, right? This is the proof text right here. So they're getting the good stuff, they're drinking their wine together, and one guy, a little, what do they call it? A little locker room talk, okay? So they're next to each other going, you know, the Median women, they're the most beautiful women. And the other one goes, hey, you know what? No, I disagree. Persian women, they're the most beautiful. And then that fool being Achashverosh, you know, that's what they're going to use for him here. So Achashverosh says, hey, the vessel which I use is neither Median nor Persian, but Chaldean. Would you like to see, this vessel, so to speak? And they say, yeah, but, naked. He goes, sure, why not? Husband of the year. I believe there's a Mel Brooks line, it's good to be the king, might be sort of apt in this scenario. But yes, right? And so the rabbis take that little verse, right, about bring the queen wearing the crown, saying, it's not only that, it's really much more lasciviousness and illicit than it actually says. So again, Vashti, a little irritated. Okay, so that's the end of our little midrash there. Now we're going to jump back into the story. Linda, you want to pick up there?
Then the king consulted the sages, learned in procedure, for it was a royal practice to turn to all who were versed in law and precedent. His closest advisors were Karshina, Shetar, Amatha, Tarnish, Meres, Mersana, and Memucan, the 7 ministers of Persia and Media, who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom. What, he asked, shall be done according to law to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs?
Thank you for that. Once again, we have the silly name alert, right? And so we just get all these names in a row. So I appreciate that, Linda, for powering through on those names. But now we go back to the archetype issue, right? The caricature issue. We have the king, right? We have the leader of Persia, 127 kingdoms, provinces under his reign. He knows nothing about the law. He has no idea what to do in this situation. He's baffled by what's next. He can't handle his business. So he has to turn to these 7 guys here to say, what's the law? What happens here now that Queen Vashti has sort of spurned me? What am I supposed to do? And so he clearly has no idea what his role is or what his response should be. So he turns to these wise men, so to speak, not so wise as it'll turn out. Okay, people bounce over my screen a little bit, so I'm not sure who read. Leah, you haven't read yet, right?
Right.
Okay, you want to pick up there, Memucan?
Sure. Thereupon Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense, not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation.
Very nice. So this doofus minister here, Memucan, he decides to make the problem about 1,000 times worse by saying what? You know, Vashti didn't just spurn you. She spurned all of the men in Persia, all of the people. It's a great crime against everybody. Because why? It's going to lead to a feminist uprising. And we can't have that in Persia and Media in 400 BCE, right? That if you can't get your queen to do what you tell her to do, all the women are going to revolt against their husbands. They're going to throw off the natural order of things, according to Memucan. You know, they're going to just completely go wild. It's going to be craziness. It's going to be anarchy. It's going to be a panic in the streets, and there will be no end to scorn or provocation. Okay, Memucan might be exaggerating the problem just a skosh. You know, I think he probably doesn't have a good beat on it, but that's his recommendation, or that's his concern, that now we're going to have societal upheaval because of this. Exaggeration, a very important part, of course, the scroll of Esther, as we mentioned, right? There's a lot of hyperbole, exaggeration, again, lends to the idea of this being a satire. Okay, so Memucan's going to continue with his brilliant advice. Melissa, you want to give a little read here?
If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus. And let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm. Excuse me, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike.
Yeah, there you go. That's what Memucan has to say here. So, of course, we have this issue of somehow, like, he writes this law and it can never be abrogated. You know, it can't be reversed. I'm pretty sure he can just write another law, but we'll skip past that. You know, but basically banishing Vashti, getting her out of the way, out of the picture here, and then we're gonna have another queen instead. And of course, it'll resound throughout the land, that everyone will know how to treat each other. Amen, amen. So Memucan has his plan here to suppress the female revolution, the feminist revolution of Persia. Again, I think he might be taking things a little bit too far, is my guess. Okay. Gary, you want to pick up there?
The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in its own script, and to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people.
There you go. So that's his political statement that begins the book of Esther. So that's how we start. That's sort of our background. Vashti, a very fascinating character, especially in the rabbinic period, but more so, obviously, you know, for those of us who, you know, have read some different interpretations and takes on this story of the past 50 years. You know, so Vashti, of course, in the rabbinic text, is sort of mocked and made a fool out of. You know, they have a story that says, well, she can't come before the king, naked because she had a tail, and then people would mock her for her tail. And so they have a lot of fun with poor Vashti. But then, of course, late 20th century, we had more of a turn on Vashti, and that she was seen more, obviously, as also a strong female character, right? As somebody who stands up for herself, who's not going to be made a mockery out of. and she is someone who is in her own way also can be viewed as an inspiring figure, courageous figure in her own right. And I think that's good. I think that's a nice reading of it. Sort of reclaim Vashti a little bit. I think that's only for the good. Okay, all that to get us to chapter 2. So now we have to dive in. Actually, Gary, you want to read a little more for me here sometime afterwards?
Okay. Sometime afterward, when the anger of King Ahasuerus subsided, he thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan, in the harem, under the supervision of Hagi, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women. Let them be provided with their cosmetics, and let the maidens who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti." The proposal, I can't read the Bible. The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, so now we're going to get into the Persians Next Top Model competition here. Let all these beautiful young virgins be brought, and let them sort of be here in the harem, which so all the women are going to be under the supervision of the eunuch. Of course, for obvious reasons, it's good to have a eunuch in these situations. So, to make sure everything is on the up and up. So they are there, and they're going to be given cosmetics, and they're going to be basically in a beauty contest, in a pageant here. And the king's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. Why not? Because that's how we should do it." Okay, Sandy, you want to pick up here in the fortress?
In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai, son of Jar, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Kish had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into exile along the king Jeconiah of Judah, which had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He was foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter.
Okay, so now we have the next story. We did that already about Achashverosh and Vashti and all that other stuff. So now we need the introduction to our heroes, right? And so we have to give them their backstory. So we have Mordechai, the Jew, who has this lineage, right? Always important to have the lineage there, and a little bit of the backstory of how they got to where they are. And now the fun begins. He's foster father to Hadassah, who goes by Esther, right? And so that's probably a nod, one can guess, to the fact, but yes, a little bit of assimilation, right? That's there. So how many of us have our Hebrew names, right, or our Yiddish names, and the names were called day to day, right? And so sometimes those names match up a little bit. Sometimes they're a little different, when we're out in the world. And so we have a baby naming, we have a bris, whatever it is, and your name is, Cycle, Golda, Bot, whatever it is. But you're Tiffany, day to day, right? And so it's a different way of looking at it. So Hadassah is very clearly her Jewish name, right? Her Hebrew name. And Esther is sort of how she's out in the world as Esther. As we mentioned, probably from Ishtar, the Persian goddess. The rabbis, as one can assume, don't love the idea of a heroine here named after a Persian goddess. So we need to have a little bit of a change here. Sorry, I skipped a little bit. So he brought up Hadassah. So that's that's the biblical text that we have Hadassah. She is called Hadassah. This is from the Talmud. She's called Hadassah, and she's called Esther, as it has been taught. Esther is her proper name. Why is she called Hadassah then? after the designation of the righteous who are called myrtles. For so it says, as he stood among the myrtle trees. Doesn't matter. But when we shake the lulav and etrog, one of the species in the lulav is hadas. It is the myrtle branch, right? And so she's called Esther. She's called Hadassah because she is like a myrtle, and a myrtle is a symbol of righteousness. Okay, Rabbi Judah then says, Hadassah is her name, so why is she called Esther? You know, flipping it around. And so the rabbis say, I know why she's called Esther, because she concealed the facts about herself. Lehastir being the Hebrew root that means to hide. That's the verb. So she's called Esther because she hides herself. Lehastir. She does not make herself known to her people or her kindred. She hides her Jewishness. That's why she is Esther, because she hides. Rabbi Nehemiah says, you know what, maybe differently. Hadassah was her name, and she is called Esther. So then they say, okay, yes, that's because of Ishtar, right? All people called her so after Ishtar, the Persian goddess. Ben Azai said, Esther was neither too tall nor too short, but of medium size, like a myrtle. Okay, we're stretching this a little bit now because there are plenty of things that are not too tall or not too short, and they're not myrtles. So, Ben Azai is not getting us very far. He's stretching it a bit. Then, of course, one of my personal favorites, Rabbi Joshua ben Chorcha, he comes in and says, Esther was sallow. She had a greenish complexion, a yellowish greenish complexion. So because she was green, so to speak, you almost have to imagine Elphaba from Wicked, so because Esther was sort of green in complexion, that's why she was called that, because Hadass, she was green like a myrtle. She was the wicked witch from the west, from Wizard of Oz. That could be the reference as well. But because she had great charm.
What would we have said when she was black?
She wasn't much of a looker, but she had great charm, because she was green. There's a lot there to unpack, but it's just, again, shows you that the rabbis were really struggling and playing with what this text could possibly mean. And so they go from the more serious, that her name is a play on words for hiding her identity, and others go to the fact that maybe she was the Incredible Hulk instead. So there's lots of room to play with poor Esther. She was a Ninja Turtle. Okay, so I think that was everyone that's had a chance to give a little read so far. But I didn't see Tyler before. Tyler, would you like to read? You're okay for today?
He doesn't want to read tonight.
That's okay. I didn't see him before, but now I sort of see him in the shadows. That's okay. It's okay. Sharon, we're back up to the top of the order. Up here.
Okay. When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and when many girls were assembled in the fortress, Shushan, under the supervision of Haggai, Esther, too, was taken into the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he hastened to furnish her with her cosmetics and her rations, as well as with the 7 maids who were her due from the king's palace. And he treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem.
In the harem, okay. And so, actually, can you give me one more?
Yeah. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. Every single day, Mordecai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her.
Okay, excellent. And so she's not in this situation, right? She's in with all these other women, and part of this experience of picking the next queen. And Mordecai sort of tells her ahead of time, maybe don't mention the Jewish thing so much. It's unclear why. Like for us, from our own context, right, from what we would guess, is that we would say, okay, anti-Semitism, maybe they didn't like Jews so much, right? But there's not much here that would sort of tell us that was the reason. As we know, the Persian community was a little bit more tolerant of other faith traditions. They just wanted you to pay your money. And as we're going to learn in about a chapter, Mordechai is like in good with the king. You know, Mordechai is a courtier. He's a minister in the Persian government, right? And so one has to question what's going on here. Is it really that he's worried that her Jewishness is going to be a disqualifier, you know, from her being queen? Is there something else sort of going on? Don't reveal you're Jewish, right? Don't reveal that's who you are. And Mordechai, because he's got some stroke, you know, as we're going to see in the next chapter, you know, he's around a lot. He gets to sort of be around the harem, you know, and learn what's happening, which one would presume is not going to be the case of every male that's around. You know, that they're a little bit careful with their young, beautiful virgins, so to speak, not to have a lot of men around. So Mordechai does have access. You know, he is a higher up in the community, and he's there just checking in, what's happening, how the beauty treatment's going, you know, because there's a lot of beauty treatments going on, because it's spa day at the palace. That's our next part here, because it's not spa day, actually, it's a misnomer. It's spa year at the palace. Good times had by all. Debbie Siegel, you want to read about our spa treatments?
Okay. When each girl's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of the 12 months treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil and of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. And it was after that the girl would go to the king. Whatever she asked for would be given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go in the evening and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shagaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her, when she would be summoned by name.
Okay, now we're going to get in some dicey territory. I mean, first, of course, we have, hey, isn't it nice? You get to go to the Safety Harbor Resort and Spa. You get to have a year-long treatment of oils, of myrrh and perfumes, getting all glammed up for the king. And then you'd go, you know, if you wanted, you know, even cold, to go in, whatever you want, you can sort of bring with you. She'd go in the evening and leave in the morning for the second harem, which was a little bit dicier. It's a little bit less subtle here what this second harem was all about, garden of the concubines. And so that's a little bit more, it's a different step, so to speak. But that's where she is. She's sort of bouncing back and forth a bit. And then when the king summons her, you know, then she'd go. When she gets singled out, called by name, she would go to the king. One can read in this a few different things, you know, certainly. But the king is certainly it's taking a little while to decide what's going on here. He has many beautiful women to choose from, but of course, as we know, our heroine is going to be the one to be chosen here. Renee, you want to pick up a little bit?
Sure. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abhal, the uncle of Mordechai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go to the king, she did not ask for anything but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women, advised. Yet Esther won the admiration of all who saw her. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the virgins. So he set a royal diadem on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The king gave a great banquet for all his officials and courtiers, the banquet of Esther. He proclaimed remission of taxes for the provinces and distributed gifts as befits distributed gifts as befits a king.
A good time is had by all, right?
Wow.
So we had a banquet to start. Now we get another banquet because now the king's engaged. Now the king's married. Mazel tov. She gets the crown. Good food everywhere. The banquet of Esther. And even better, no taxes, right? We've got a tax-free time here. Everyone's celebrating a little bit more money in the pocket, good for the economy, for your remission of taxes, and then on top of the taxes being exempt, now we're also going to get gifts too. He's sending out some little gelt to people. He's in a really good mood. Again, good to be the king. He's very happy here. But now we have a little foreshadowing. A little foreshadowing of trouble ahead. Linda, you want to pick up here?
When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordechai sat in the palace gate. But Esther still did not reveal her kindred or her people, as Mordechai had instructed her. For Esther obeyed Mordechai's bidding, as she had done when she was under his tutelage. At that time, when Mordechai was sitting in the palace gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. Mordechai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordechai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and the two were impaled on stakes. This was recorded in the Book of Annals at the instance of the king. Wow.
Okay, thank you for that. And that's actually going to be where we end today. So we have Mordechai, who just so happens to be hanging out by the gate, because he's checking out how Esther is doing. Also, one that has an assumption that the gate is sort of where things happen, where things sort of might be business transacted, at the gate. So it's a place of some activity. But he was there, and as he's there, he just he overhears this plot to kill the king, and so he hears it, tells Esther, and these two dudes, these hapless folk, are found out, and they are executed quite painfully. And Mordecai gets a little bit, gets in good with the king. And so again, who you know is helpful. And sometimes circumstances present themselves. And so Mordecai, who was already, again, one that we're going to see in the next chapter, was already a government official, gets a little bit more love. But that's going to be for next time around. But it's going to also, again, we're going to come back to that. This is going to be a little hint, a little part in the story that is not going to be acted upon just now, but it's going to be used as a plot device when we get later on into the book. That Mordecai, this act is going to be recalled for the good. And so that's the first two chapters, and we didn't even get to the bad guy yet. The bad guy is next week. It really is, as you can see, I think a really fun book. It really is one of those books. There are a number of books, but I would say Esther being one of them in particular. It's just fun to read it. You can just sort of read it cover to cover, and to sort of enjoy it for all that it contains. And there's a lot of great lessons, a lot of really, I think, important ideas about identity, about what it means to be a Jewish person, then and now, about the courage to stand up for your convictions. And for me, as we well know, it's these stories that they can be serious or not so serious, but they still have an important lesson regardless. Which is again one thing I love about these multi-layered and multi-textured works. So, with all of that said, Purim is coming up. Thursday night actually is Purim proper. Friday night we're gonna have during Shabbat a little fun perhaps that evening because it's the Shabbat of Purim. And then Saturday is going to be the Purim spiel, Purim program in the evening. So there's a lot of fun Purim stuff coming up. Purim, and again, like it's going to be revealed at the end of the book, is actually a 2-day holiday, depending on where you live, and because it's observed one day if you're in a walled city, and another day if you are in an unwalled city. And so depending on where you are, you can celebrate Purim twice. I had that experience once. It was the best Purim ever, just because again, the only place you can do this, and of course one of them is of course Israel, where you celebrate Purim, in Tel Aviv one day, and then you go back to Jerusalem, the walled city, you celebrate the second day. And so one can have a really good 48 to 72 hours in Israel during Purim. I'll just put it that way. There's a lot of fun to be had.
I have a quick question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
When was it decided that people would act out this book as part of the
Good question.
It's a great question, because the
That's a really good
idea
question.
develops over time. So certainly we even see, like in the Talmudic period, that frivolity was happening, right? There was going to be fun, there was going to be costuming, there was going to have that aspect of it. But I think it just develops over time, especially as we get to the medieval period. I think is it really when it begins to take off. I'd have to do a little bit of research, but I think around the medieval period when you had more plays being acted out. This is another way of acting in a play, right? To have characters. And frankly, for the Jewish community in particular, it was a day where they could let their hair down, perhaps, is one way of putting it. There was a way to goof off in a different way than perhaps they were allowed before. Gary, do I see a hand there? You still on mute? Gary, you got to unmute.
I was going to say, I remember living in Brooklyn, New York, and in the Hasidic community, I never saw so many people hammered in my life. It was like, today we can do what we want, and just got, falling down drunk. It was
Don't mess around.
It was as bad as what the old St. Patrick's Day celebrations used to be in New York, where everybody was drunk. And it was
they don't mess around on Purim.
Augsburg, New York.
And I was just shocked. I had never, when I moved to New York in '79, I'd never seen anything like that. And it's like, oh my, I was really put out.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure in Jerusalem, don't the little kids smoke cigarettes and do whatever they want on Purim? I think isn't that the holiday that they just do everything?
I haven't seen the smoking, though I would have to look at it. But that being said, like if you're in Tel Aviv, you're going to see everything and anything you ever wanted to see.
Well, I thought
or maybe didn't want to see.
Yeah, I thought it was in the really religious part. I can't even remember what it's called, but where these little kids were all sitting and smoking cigarettes. Like 10 years old.
I just remember seeing a lot of just frivolity and fun and juggling and drinking and dancing and a lot of this stuff going on. And certainly in the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox communities, which, they might enjoy it a little bit more on Shabbat as well, but particularly on Purim, they're really, I remember I was sitting at a tish. I was sitting at something. I don't remember where I was. But I just remember they were just passing around the bottle. This was like pre-COVID, obviously, and pre-whatever it is. It wasn't really sanitary then either. But, they'd pass it, then you took a slug out of it, you pass it to the next person. And this wasn't, this was the hard stuff, right? This was... and that's just what you did. You go to these baby namings at 10 a.m. And the shluvitz being passed around like water. And you go, maybe have a bagel first. Like have your something in your stomach before you're hitting the bar here. So I mean, like, there's a whole greater conversation to be had. It is, I think, a good program to run, really about Purim in particular and drinking, because there is some misconception there about like the idea of like you have to do it. And it's really not true. It's not an accurate thing. It's a custom, perhaps, that some have, but there's no like halachic legal requirement to get drunk during Purim. You know, it's like you can rejoice, you can have, you know, a good time, but you don't have to, you know, actually do that. There's the expression al lo yada, you know, which comes from the story, but the idea being is that you're supposed to drink. Al lo yada literally means like until you can't recognize it, until you can't sort of see it. So the idea being is you're supposed to drink until you cannot recognize the name of Haman versus Mordechai. So, you know, so until you can't understand it, to get that inebriated, until you can't tell the difference. And again, I just, it's not something that I promote. I think it's sort of irresponsible, to be honest. I mean, I think it's just not, that's not the way to be. And people want to drink and have a good time, that's fine, but I don't want to glamorize that in such a way. I think that's not really safe, and not really, again, it's not a good practice.
I think it's some of the groups were, you know, they're so restricted that it's the one day they can just really let go and nobody says anything. I mean, in the Hasidim, you know, every time, you know, everything is restricted in what they do. It's all prescribed, their behaviors. And this one day they can just like toss it out the window.
And remember the big one, which is, you know, the costuming is very different for them, because it's seen as a great sort of problem for them to wear, you know, garments that are not seen as one being for the gender, right? And but on Purim, that goes out the window. You know, that goes up, even in the Hasidic communities, you know, where that it can be seen as appropriate, even for the Hasidim to wear different clothing. So it's just, it's right. It's all out the window. They use it as their splurge, I guess.
It's a good day to eat as many Hamantaschen as you can until you don't recognize the names.
Yes.
Just keep eating that Hamantaschen.
And we didn't even get into the history of the Hamantaschen, which is a whole other story. If you want to have a story or two, you can Google the article that came out last year on Hamantaschen. So if you want to just never look at Hamantaschen the same way again, you can do that. But yeah, certainly. Again, there's a lot of fun, a lot of frivolity. I happen to love Hamantaschen. I can't wait. It's actually one of my favorite. You always have that Latka Hamantaschen debate, you know, as they have in colleges. And the Hillels, they always do a Latka Hamantaschen debate. There's even a song. I think it's Joe Black. Rabbi Joe Black did the song Latka Hamantaschen debate. So you can find that on YouTube. And I'm a big fan of both. But you know what? A good apricot Hamantaschen, I'm good to go.
Yeah.
I don't need the poppy as much. People love who loves the poppy? Who loves the bun?
No.
Oh, there's always a few. No, I'm surprised. Okay.
Apricot.
I'm an apricot guy. I love the apricot, Natasha. Which, by the way, cheap plug. I know we're leaving, but cheap plug. You can get your food festival stuff going. You know, we have our next food festival, April 18th, and in the Jewish Food Festival website, you can actually order apricot Hamantaschen, amongst other flavors.
Good to know.
And so I did my part today. So, you know, certainly everyone can join me. It's like, it's such a horrible excuse to order lots of deli food. It's actually the best excuse, I guess, to order a lot of deli food. And so a pound of pastrami, pound of corned beef, you know, I got a noodle kugel, because I love the noodle kugel. And one of my personal favorites is there. I don't know if it was there last time. My personal favorites, stuffed cabbage.
Yeah.
Oh,
Melissa.
I came to stuffed cabbage late. That's one of my favorite things. I love it so much. So
That's Melissa's. That's Melissa's baby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can use help. I can always use help.
You know, I love that stuffed cabbage. So I'm very excited for that. Okay. Now I'm hungry. I haven't had dinner yet, so that was good. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Night.
Night.